Thank you all for coming today to this event organized in the record time of 1 week to hear firsthand from King Okpabi and benefit from his rare presence here in London for the Shell trial that just started around the corner of the LSE at the High Court, and which will be running for another week until the 7th of March. So King Okpabi, a very warm welcome to the LSE. Thanks so much for coming, and thanks for all of you, our fabulous panelists, speakers here, for making the time to have this important discussion in the midst of a very intensive week of trial. So let me also thank the Grantham Institute, and especially Lea, Reitmeier, Shirinaz, Amirova, and Alex, who are here today to help us with setting up the event, and without whom this conversation would not have been possible. So a warm thank you to all of you for helping making it happen. So today we are really lucky to have with us a fantastic panel of experts who have been working with King Okpabi and the Ogale community he represents for nearly a decade. So let me introduce them in turn before passing the floor to them. Our guest of honor is here today, King Okpabi, leader of the Ogale community, one of the two communities, together with the Bille community, that have sued Royal Dutch Shell for its activities in the Niger Delta. We also are so lucky to be joined by Zoe Johannes, Associate Solicitor at Lide, a leading UK law firm that is championing the combat against all sorts of injustices. And as we will hear from Zoe, Lide is representing over 13,000 individuals of the Ogale and the Bille communities. So it's really a great privilege to hear from you about the causes of actions, the proceedings, the procedural history, and the preliminary issues that are being considered at the trial. We will then hear from Mark Dummett, head of the business and human rights team at Amnesty International, about their campaign on behalf of the Ogale and Bille communities and the harms that they have suffered. Mark has written several reports on these issues, among which negligence in the Niger Delta and a criminal enterprise. Both are freely available on the website of Amnesty International, so I warmly invite you to also consult these as well. And last but absolutely not least, we have Zainab Rahim with us today, who is Media and Communication Manager at RAID, a UK-based NGO that meticulously exposes and documents corporate wrongdoings, environmental harms, and human rights abuses worldwide. And at RAID, you are currently working on toxic pollution around industrial copper and cobalt mining in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So we'll be lucky to hear from you about this project too. So I think it's safe to say that we couldn't be in the company to discuss the case today. So again, a round of applause. I'm really very excited to have you here at the LSE today. So in the interest of time, and given that we have only a small hour for us today, I wanted to start or begin the conversation with a question to you, King Okpabi, about the injustices that your people have long been facing. So Shell started its activities in Nigeria in 1938, when it was first granted an exploration license. And in 1956, Shell Nigeria discovered the first oil field in the Niger Delta, starting its exploitation soon after in 1958. So today, you are demanding that Royal Dutch Shell takes full responsibility as a parent company for the actions and inactions of its Nigerian subsidiary over the past 7 decades. So could you tell us a little bit more about the lived experience and the related demands that the Ogale community you represent have been suffering, the many harms you have been suffering across time?
Yes. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I feel honored to have this opportunity to be in this prestigious London School of Economics. I'm very happy to tell my story. I am a king from the Niger Delta. Of course, the Niger Delta is in the southern part of Nigeria. It's a region that is endowed with a lot of minerals, particularly the crude oil and gas. And Ogale is in a community in Ogoniland. Ogoniland, as you know, is also in the Niger Delta with 4 local government areas, which Eleme is one, and Ogale is one of the large communities. Each of the 10 communities in Eleme has about 15 villages, and Ogale is one with about 15 villages. That's where I come from. I grew up in the 60s, 70s. I just grew up to hear that at Seashell, we call it then Shell BP, with their Land Rovers and long utility vehicles. We simply call those vehicles them danger wide load, because there is this inscription, because it carries a wide and huge load. So that's the inscription all around it, danger wide load. So that's what we call that vehicle. It's now that I know it's a Mack, this big German Mack. So those are the only vehicles we see in Ogale, those and Land Rovers and Shell workers, all white. We love them. As a little boy, then maybe about, first of all, we grow up in Africa, and we get wise at 5. At 5, you're already on your own. You can find things to help yourself around the house. So at about 7, we're helping to push the Land Rovers. We run errands. We go to the location. Remember, they are in the forest part. So great hospitality. In fact, you will be happy to even pick an empty packet of St. Maurice cigarette or some canned food, empty one. That's where we play. Those are our toys. So that's the relationship. Great humility. We love them. We were not part of the discussion. The business is between the government and them. So, and they are in our farm. Before then, we had wonderful soil, wonderful vegetations, medicinal roots. In fact, we stay in the farm for 9 months out of the 12 months of the year. The only thing we buy in order to make a pot of soup is salt. The protein we need is from our rivers, our stream, and the forest, the bushmeat. The vegetables are in abundance. We can ferment our cassava to fufu. Those of you who are close with African fufu, we ferment it. We drink the water, beautiful water. When we were little, if you're running around, we're a little bit rough and you have a cut, any elderly person there can just pick either a root or a leaf and just allow the liquid to fall on it, and in days it will dry off. That's how rich the culture was, the environment was. Yes, we had malaria and some other, but those are diseases that even the British that colonized. My father was a pharmacist, so there was an infirmary, was a dispenser, they called them then, and he will wear his white socks, short knicker, and he lacks people to treat because of the local medicine. The soil is so rich, the vegetations. And we don't, in the primary school, you don't have to carry snack. During breaks, you go behind the school building, and there are lots of good fruits to eat, to snack on. We also that's how we get our pocket money. In those days, when you go to the bush, you get some good leaves that you can sell to the market women that they used to wrap their sales, not now that you have all these plastic bags. That is the environment that I grew up in. I have 5 boys and a girl. They schooled here. I don't think that they will ever get that experience. Those vegetations that I was making reference to, those beautiful weather, those beautiful soils are gone. The painful aspect of it is those who destroy us were living there with us. They had our hospitality. We were very open, even though they are making billions of pounds from there. We didn't care. We were so good with them. We had good relationship, good rapport. We take them out. We take them to the local bars. Even the palm wine that they were enjoying then, they ended up killing all the palm trees. I had an uncle whose trade was a palm wine tapper. From palm wine tapping, he was able to train his children in school and build a brick house. That's our way of life. All that Shell BP gradually, 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 as we were relating with them, with all the stories I've told you, they were in turn gradually destroying those things, those little things, those things we had. We didn't need any electricity. We didn't need those, all we needed to survive was that environment, that natural environment. My children now cannot get that. That sound, those species of birds, animals, they are gone. Those streams are gone forever. So I ascended this stool of my forefathers, and incidentally, it's not hereditary. As you grow up, if they see that you have that capacity, that courage to lead, when the vacancy comes, they will bestow that on you. So I believe it's destiny, though my forefathers from both maternal and paternal have sat on the throne that I'm sitting on now. Was it coincidence? And so I'm a treaty king because King Okpabi in 1896 signed the treaty on behalf of Ogale people and the British monarch. I'm telling my friend here to try and get me that treaty. It's here in London. So I'm a treaty king. And my forebearers love England. They love the British. They love the monarch. Why should a company from here destroy that place? Why? Why should a company domiciled in the United Kingdom be responsible for the total destruction of my people, of my land? So when I ascended the throne in 2008, I began to, to see what is happening. Of course, we know people are getting strange diseases. skin disease. People are dying. Low sperm count. Birth defects. You know, so a lot of things, even before AIDS came up, people were drying up, who are just dying. And so we didn't know until the United Nations did the studies that came out in 2011, I believe. And then it was discovered by the United Nations that my community, Ogale, the waterbed has been polluted to a level of 900, 9 times the level of benzene, the level acceptable for human consumption. Not 1, not 100, not 200, not 300, 900% over. That's what my people are drinking now. That's the water everywhere in Ogale. He has been to the palace, and everywhere. So we buy water. I can afford to buy water. I don't know how much money I have to be buying, but we buy. Buy to drink, buy to wash clothes, buy to, So in my capacity as the king with the political leaders, we put signposts on all the waters point. Please don't drink. It's poison. Don't drink. But if you're telling somebody, don't drink, and you're not providing alternative, they will drink. They will tell you, hey, they can't die of this. So that's my story. So I wrote to Shell severally, let us talk. Of course, Shell is synonymous with the Nigerian leaders. So you cannot reach them. You can't. Even for what I'm doing is by the special grace of God, and I have a name to answer. Even as I speak now, I've been here, it is risky for me. Shell has several ways of fighting back. They can try to divide your kingdom. They can give money to some people from your kingdom to fight you. All that is going on, but they refuse to listen to my pleas. And so we began to see whether we can file a case in Nigeria. That was there for 2 years. Nobody listened to us, even to call the case. It was not even pronounced. And then we now went to, I think, to Chicago. We realized that there is no jurisdiction. And by the grace of God, because of the Border case that exposed the lead lawyers, and then we contacted them. And here we are 10 years after. I think she would tell that they've been bringing one technicalities or the other, and one shenanigan, and this just delaying us. Now we are back in court. I've been here for 3 weeks now. They are talking about, they say, we don't have our fundamental human rights to life and to clean environment. And even if we do, then we should not hold them responsible. We should hold the Nigerian government. Of course, we don't have that strength. So that's why I'm here. And I thank you for listening to my story.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your information with us. And Zoe, I would like to turn to you now to hear a bit more about how the demands traveled from the Niger Delta to the High Court in London and how they got translated into the legal proceedings.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's really important to listen to people from the community talking about what the result has been for them and for their lived experience, because I think in the legal context, we can get caught up in what are we asking for in terms of damages, and we can talk about, loss of earnings and, oh, people aren't able to fish, so this is what they've lost. Whereas actually it's more impactful to hear somebody like King Okpabi talking about the effect on people's health every day and people struggling to even have water to drink, things like that. So thank you for giving a bit of that context. Yeah, I think I have a presentation that
will you be able to nod to Alex will kindly do? Sorry, that's the next one. the next slide. This one, yes, please.
Thank you. My rudimentary presentation, because I am really bad at PowerPoint, but we'll try. So yeah, if you could go to the next slide. So the case is brought on behalf of these two communities, the Bille community and the Ogale community. And yeah, so the Bille community these are both in the Niger Delta, and they've both suffered very similar impacts from Shell's pollution. The Bille community is a riverine community, so it's only accessible by boat. And basically because of oil spills from Shell's pipelines and also from other infrastructure that I'll go through in a minute, basically the pollution has killed most of the fish in the area, and the Bille community survives based on fishing, that's how they feed their own community, and that's how they make their livelihoods as well. So it's been devastating for them, and the oil pollution has killed basically all the vegetation in the area. So it's had a devastating impact on the mangroves, which is a source of vegetation in the area. That top picture is of some oil that you can see visibly on the water in Bille. And then Ogale is King Okpabi's community, and that's the larger claim. So there's approximately 11,000 claimants from Ogale in the case, and it's for a longer period of time as well. We're claiming for pollution from 1989 to date, whereas for Bille, it's just a period of 2 years that we're claiming for, that all of the spills took place during that time. And Ogale is fishing and farming. So the impact on the soil is what we're focusing on, as well as the water, which you described. And that's a picture of Ogale. Next slide. So for law students and people interested in law, so these are the causes of action that are being brought in this case. So there's a wide range of causes of action in terms of your standard torts. We're bringing claims under the tort of negligence and nuisance, and Rylance and Fletcher, which is strict liability for waste or dangerous substances emanating from someone's land onto someone else's. And so that's kind of, those will be familiar to people who study English law. Nigerian law is very similar to English law in those areas, and sometimes does rely on precedents from the English courts. Then there's a statute in Nigeria called the Oil Pipelines Act, and that governs spills from pipelines directly. So some of the spills in the communities have not been from pipelines directly. They've been from other infrastructure that belongs to Shell, like wells. And so those spills, non-pipeline spills, we call them, would not fall under the Oil Pipelines Act. Those would just be subject to the tort claims, whereas spills that are directly from the pipelines are governed by this specific statute. And then also maybe the most interesting cause of action is the cause of action under public law. So we're bringing claims for breaches of several human rights under the Nigerian Constitution. So section 33 and 34 of the Constitution are the right to life and the right to freedom from inhuman and degrading treatment. And then the African Charter, there's claims under Articles 16, 22, and 24. Article 24 is the right to a healthy environment. And the other two, I believe, are the right to health and sustainable development, or just development. So those are the public law aspects of the case. And based on all of those causes of action, we're seeking compensation for the claimants as well as remediation to the land. Next slide. So the case started 10 years ago. That was when claim forms were first served in 2015. And then for the next 5 years, there were various jurisdictional challenges from the defendants arguing that we shouldn't be able to bring the case in the UK. To which we argued that Shell, the parent company, is based in the UK, and also that there was a sort of access to justice argument in that Shell is such a massive multinational company, and the scale of lawyers and law firms that would be needed be more accessible here. So we eventually won that fight in 2021, but it did go all the way to the Supreme Court. And now the case is being heard here. And so English law governs the procedure, but Nigerian law still governs the substantive law. So, yep. And then after that, after 2021, we had a few other issues that had to happen before we now got to where we are now. So I won't go through them because I don't have time, but we ended up back in the Court of Appeal last year on basically more procedural issues that the defendant raised. They also raised that they challenged our ability to bring the claim under the Constitution. They said that we added that at the last minute and it's not really a human rights claim, and various other things. But having sorted out those issues, we're now, this month, we're having a preliminary issues trial, which is just to try issues of Nigerian law before the full trial of the case at the end of 2026. Next slide, final slide. Thank you. So this, I'm just going to talk very briefly about the preliminary issues trial, which is happening right now. So basically, the purpose of this is to narrow the issues between the parties, and also to hear expert evidence from Nigerian lawyers so that the English court can understand how the Nigerian Supreme Court would decide the issues. Because it's Nigerian law, she has to hear from experts in that so that she can, as a matter of fact, decide how the Nigerian Supreme Court would treat it, so that she can then make those decisions at the trial next year. She meaning the judge, who at this point is Mrs. Justice May. And yeah, there's some areas of agreement between the parties which are not being dealt with at the trial. So obviously, well, not obviously, but the parties agree that, you know, there is strict liability for spills emanating directly from Shell's pipelines, which is governed by the legislation. The parties also agree that for spills that don't come directly from the pipelines, that there could be liability and negligence. I'm not saying that the parties agree that Shell is liable, but they agree that potentially that liability, based on the facts, that liability could occur. So that's the purpose of this trial, not to decide any liability, but just to decide like what is potentially within the scope of the trial next year. And so a couple of key issues that have come up at the trial, in terms of private law, there's this question of third-party interference, which is that sometimes third parties, individuals break into Shell's pipelines to steal the oil and illegally refine it themselves and sell it. And whether the issue is whether or not Shell should be liable for damage resulting from that, whether they should be liable both for the damage directly resulting from people tapping in if oil is spilled as a result of that, and then also more remotely, if they should be liable for those people then down the line using that oil that they've stolen and dumping the waste from that refining process into the water. So Shell would say that they're not liable for that it's too remote. And we would say that they are, because that's a foreseeable consequence of having a pipeline, not protecting it and allowing people to go in and steal from it. That's a really common issue in the area, and it's been known about for years. So we're arguing that they should be aware of that and take steps to prevent it. And then the other main issue, I guess, is to do with the constitutional and African charter rights. So Shell argues that it's not within the scope of the right to life, for example, to environmental pollution, that isn't a threat to someone's life. And we argue that it is obviously a very real threat to somebody's life if they don't have any water to drink and they don't have any way of sustaining their lives. So that's kind of the easiest issue to talk about. Most people will be familiar with, you know, human rights and understand that. But that's kind of a big, if the judge makes that decision that it's not within the scope, then, you know, that's a claim that we couldn't even bring later next year. But if she decides it is within the scope, then that's a really helpful decision for future claims in this area. And then the last point is, as King Okpabi mentioned, Shell doesn't think that we should be able to bring this case against them because they're a private company. They think that human rights claims should only be against states. And we say that, you know, based on the Nigerian case law and jurisprudence, that there's a precedent for bringing it against states, and we should be able to hold corporations responsible for this kind of thing.
Thank you. Thanks so much for this amazing overview in a record time of 5
Yeah.
5 minutes and a little more. So thank you. Mike, I want to turn to you as in light of your more than 10 years of experience at Amnesty International. I would love to hear more about the findings of Amnesty and their campaigns and reporting in the area, and also what your sense is about the sort of, after a 7-long-decade presence in the Niger region, the threat that Shell is now implying with exiting or withdrawing from the area if they would enact their divestment plans as planned. So yeah, hearing more from you on that would be very illuminating. Thank
Sure.
you.
Yeah, okay,
We can keep the intervention very, very brief to 5 minutes. That would be amazing, just to allow more time for discussions.
I'm gonna try and do that. I don't have a presentation, but
Yeah,
pardon me if I'm rambling. I just wanted to pick up really three main points. One of those is divestment and the risks of Shell quitting the Niger Delta, which is what they've announced they're going to be doing shortly. That'll be the third point that I want to get to. First couple are really placing this case in context, in the context of the demands for justice of people across the Niger Delta. We will often hear Ogoniland in the, for those of us who follow the news or followed campaigns, I suppose, of human rights and the environment in the Niger Delta, Ogoniland plays a very prominent role. But of course, Ogoniland is just one small part of the Niger Delta. It's a vast area. Not quite sure what the latest figure is of the population of the Niger Delta, but people say it's about 30 million. It's about the size of Ireland, the island of Ireland in total. Hundreds of oil wells in hundreds of oil fields scattered across this entire region, connected by these pipelines, the pipelines which run through the forests and fields, through villages, through cities, down to the coast, and these export terminals, which then take the oil to Europe and America and around the world. And these pipelines are key to the business. It's the only way of getting the oil out, but they're the point of vulnerability as well. They corrode, they're poorly maintained. They're also attacked, as we heard, and people steal oil, leave these spills, although the leaking oil unattended. So Amnesty International, we've been working or sort of campaigning for the rights of people of the Niger Delta since the 1990s, which was when Ken Saro-Wiwa and Mossop led their famous and impactful and extraordinary campaigns for justice against Shell and the Nigerian government. At that time, our focus really was on civil and political rights. So it was on the victims of the military crackdown, it was on the unfair trial, it was on the execution of the Ogoni 9. But in the years since, we've been looking at the full range of rights and really the issues that lay behind those protests, the Ogoni protests. So the impact of the oil industry, the pollution, the violations of the right to health, livelihood, and all of those other issues connected to the dreadful impacts that the King was telling us about so powerfully earlier. And just to say, I did visit Ogale last October, and we went to one of the water points, and the water came out clean, but it stank of benzene, absolutely stank. And the white tiles, it has these white tiles behind, it's a community tap, and they were stained dark brown. And this is, how many years after that UNEP report? You said 2011. It hasn't been addressed, and Shell knows it. Everyone knows that it's there. Shell and the Nigerian government. It's a huge scandal, and so this is what we've been working on. So where to place this trial in context? It is, of course, hugely important because the barriers to justice within the Niger Delta, as we heard the King say, are enormous. There are, dozens of communities have taken Shell to court and other oil companies to court in Port Harcourt and other courts in the region. And more often than not, in pretty much all cases, apart from one that I'm aware of, maybe there's more than one, these cases just get bogged down for years and years, for decades. Plaintiffs die, heard lawyers die. It's technicality after technicality. Every document that's filed gets challenged by Shell. There's there's a delay of months for, for a hearing about whether that document can be included, and people give up. I was visited actually in the same trip a community called Kedere. They have a shell. It's called the Bomu manifold. It's this sort of it's where the pipelines meet, and it's in the middle of the community. And there have been terrible spills over the years there, well documented. Nothing to do with oil theft. It's due to poor maintenance. There was a huge fire many years ago, and it hasn't been properly cleaned up. Kedere has tried on a number of occasions to get adequate, proper, meaningful compensation and a clean up from shell through the courts, and they've had to give up. It's just not possible. So, it's great that Lide has taken on this case and is representing the people of these communities. But let's think about all those communities who don't have lawyers here, who that's gone quickly. Who don't have lawyers here. The next point I was going to make was about information, and this is the other sort of big barrier to justice, is a lack of it, the lack of access to information that communities have. And again, I think this is something that we're looking for with this case, and we saw with the Bodo case, is one of the few ways in which people do get access to that information, in which companies are forced to disclose information about their operations, is through cases like this. Again, it's sad, it's unfortunate, it's unfair that we have to rely on these incredibly complicated cases to get that information, but hopefully at least we'll be getting that, or you'll be getting that sometime in the next year. Okay, divestment. This trial couldn't be happening at a more important time. In December last year, the Nigerian government gave the green light to Shell, SPDC, that's their subsidiary that runs their operations in the Delta, to divest, to be bought by a consortium of mainly Nigerian-owned companies. This is sort of part of a wider process. When the oil industry was started in the 50s, it was Shell BP, then you had other oil majors, and over the past 20 years, it's been Nigerian companies have been buying these, and that's many levels. Of course, that absolutely makes sense. It's not the nationality of the companies that's the problem. It's about their capacity and their resources to maintain these complicated assets. And these are largely small companies which do not have the experience or the skills or the capacity to take on SPDC's pipelines and wells. So Amnesty and lots of other Nigerian, mainly, environmental and human rights organizations have been campaigning against this divestment. And it's worrying because, at least the King and Lide are able to sue Shell here. What will happen after the divestment? In other cases, for other communities affected by historic spills, this could be another big barrier to justice. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Mark. I hope we can hear more from you in the Q&A, which I'm trying to save in one way or another. But Zainab, I want to turn to you, because indeed, as we heard, the Shell case is, of course, a sort of paradigmatic example of a case related to oil extractivism, fossil fuel extractivism. And in light of your work at RAID, I was wondering what kind of patterns or dependencies you are able to see in the shift a bit from the old frontier towards the new frontier of extractivism, with the turn to critical mineral mining and well, the extractivism needed for the so-called green transition, or so-called green green extractivism at stake.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Marie. So the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is supposed to be a fundamental human right, but it's routinely violated by companies, not just in the Niger Delta, across sub-Saharan Africa. Ecological disasters are not only historic, as King Okpabi has really articulately explained, that it's affected generation after generation after generation. But its effects can be quite hidden from public view, and sometimes not so hidden. And what we found, so what we found is this is obviously not not only something that's relegated to the fossil fuel era, it's something that's very much present in mining for the green energy transition. Very similar patterns. You have exploitation of local communities, you have wastewater spills and other types of pollution. There's a certain attitude of disposability of people and environment, which is sometimes being called sacrifice zones. And at the moment, there's a very high demand for minerals, for green energy, for renewables, and for electric vehicles in the global north. But at the same time, you see communities of the global south are the ones who are suffering. So there's not really, at the moment, a just transition. There's a lot of minerals in demand. It's cobalt, copper, lithium, nickel, graphite, and many others. We've focused at RAID on industrial cobalt mining. So you might have seen on Instagram, for example, there's a lot of kind of viral posts around Congo at the moment. You'll see imagery of like child labor and people digging with their bare hands. That's artisanal mining, and it represents a much smaller percentage of cobalt exports from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Not insignificant, but it's much smaller. So we're looking at about 88% of cobalt exports are from industrial mines. They're the big mines, the big European, Chinese companies who say that their cobalt is clean. But when we've gone and investigated, we've had two major reports. One of them has been on workers' rights, which was in 2021. And then this one, which was last year, is coming up to a year now, which was based on environmental pollution and in particular water pollution around 5 of the largest copper cobalt mines in Congo. And so we spoke to people who are living around, like at the front line of the frontline communities who are living around the industrial mines. We spoke to people from 25 villages and towns. And yeah, as I said, the mines are operated by European Chinese companies. We can go into in the Q&A if there's time. And the cobalt from these mines is traced to a lot of car manufacturers that you would recognize their names, as well as some tech companies. Our key findings were that everybody we spoke to was unequivocal about the fact that water contamination is affecting their lives, their health, and their income. So, we have almost everybody who responded said that agriculture and fishing was affected, and 60% of people had to pull their children out of school because they could no longer afford the school fees. And coming onto the health issues, very similar to what King Okpabi has been talking about, which is really strange skin diseases and rashes and patches. And then one of the surprising findings that we had was that we didn't really go in thinking much about was the impacts on women. So we had 56% of respondents said to us that they're experiencing gynecological issues, reproductive issues, miscarriages, birth defects, and irregular periods. And it's particularly affecting teenagers and young girls. So I could tell you a bit in the Q&A about what the companies say. I could tell you about Congolese environmental law, which is actually really strong, but there's not enough resource to implement that law. And our message at RAID is really, of course, we need to move away from fossil fuel extraction and move towards net zero to address the climate emergency, but it should not be at the expense of Congolese people and other communities in the global south where we've seen this pollution proliferate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all so much. We have about 15 minutes for a Q&A. So in the interest of time, I would like to gather 2-3 for questions, bundle them, and then give the floor back to our speakers. So I will start with you here, then you, and then you in the back. So please, you have the floor. And if you can just briefly introduce yourself and keep the questions really, really short. You can speak up or you can...
Okay, thank you. Yes, a question for Zoe. What would be in terms of course of action, what additional would the public law points add in terms of course of action to the torts course of action? It seems to me that it is very novel. Would be wonderful if they get the law right, but I'm wondering whether the court here will tend to see the right to life in the way the European Court has interpreted that, which is removed from a right to healthy environment. So I wonder.
Yeah, thanks so much. If you can just bear with the question, we will go to you next, please. You had your hand raised? Yes, please.
Okay.
You need to keep the mic. So sorry. You need to keep the mic. Yeah.
Okay. Oh,
Perfect.
okay, great.
You press-
Sorry, the mic is
Press it.
not working.
Just shout.
Yeah, perfect. We hear you
Oh,
now.
is it working?
Thank you.
Okay, right. So, yeah, Alison Lindner, UCL Faculty of Laws. I've got two questions. One is for King Okpabi. My first question to you, or my question for you, is how has you spoke about the decimation of the vegetation. You also mentioned that in the past there was a very strong tradition of sort of folk healing, and I'm wondering how some of those traditions have been affected by Shell's, the vegetation being decimated. Is there still a knowledge base around sort of traditional healing in your community? And then my next question is for probably the whole panel, but mainly Zoe, and that is what you've described sounds like the typical playbook for companies in this position. So what are the chances that if you get to the point of trial, that that you will be offered a settlement? And is it something that, would be entertained, or, what would be the particular position on that, if it comes to that?
Thank you. And one last question, if you can bear with, you had your hand raised? Yes, thank you.
Hi, thank you for sharing. I'm Kim from LSE. My question is, has the Nigerian government taken a stance on this the Okpabi case, or is that a deliberate strategy to distance itself in case of any interference? Thank you.
Thank you. So maybe we start with King Okpabi, and then we go to Zoe, and then any of you who would like to.
Yes, if they are, if we're able to keep those our values, and it's completely gone. Like I said, those medicinal values and way of life is gone. It was gradually, so we're not even prepared the way it was going. Remember, I told you that we thought we are dealing with people who were helping us, but it was a gradual. When a medicine man goes severally to try to get his raw material and they're not there, nobody knows how they are gradually disappearing, that the tradition itself will go. I told you about the palm wine tapa. There is no palm wine tree, so that one is gone. And then, yeah, so that's my answer for you. Those way of life are gone forever. And so when we're asking for livelihood, is just some sort of circle, like I've always said, just something. They can never replace what they have taken from us. And the lady there about the collaboration, can I take that?
Yes, please, of course.
With the government. You see, the government and the Shell are almost one and same. Because, like I said, they contracted them. But legally, Shell is the operator. The operator is responsible for, I'm not a lawyer, but I believe that the operator, that's the way they've done it, but they share the profit after the operation, because Shell only decide how much he uses to bring the oil and refine it. So it is whatever Shell declares as profit that they shares with the government. The owners of the area are not part of their district. So it is very difficult, like what happened in the United States and here, when a government can say, hey, you have destroyed the people, like this is someone you, we didn't need to go through the courts. The Nigerian government would have just said, look, this is what you will pay before you do anything. You need to give them this, give them, but it's not there. It will not be there. Yeah.
Yeah. Just to the first question that you asked about the right to life and its connection to a healthy environment. So if we think about it in the European context, you're right that there are not very strong precedents for that. But of course, it's not the European context. So there are cases in the past kind of few years from the African court and also from the Inter-American court, interestingly. They tend to be a little bit more recently have been more understanding of the connection between those two issues. So there was a case, Arroyo versus Peru this year, or maybe last year, which did hold in favor of the claimants in terms of the right to life because of environmental damage. There's also a case in the African court, Lido versus Cote d'Ivoire, which held the same thing. So it's not unheard of, especially in these contexts where arguably those two areas of the world are more aware in a human rights context of the rights of indigenous groups and people who, need to use the environment for their livelihoods and things in a way which hasn't been recognized by the European court. But the issue here is obviously that you can't sue a private company in the African court. So it's sort of taking it out of that context of the international treaty and into the context of Nigeria as a country and whether you can do that there, but it's not unheard of. And yeah, we're hoping that this is just yet another example of them being held responsible. In terms of what would it gain, the remedies are largely the same as the private law causes of action. One key thing though is that there would be no limitation period for constitutional and African charter causes of action. So those oil spills that started in 1989 in Ogale, we'd be able to claim for those, and we may not otherwise if we don't have those human rights causes of action. The other question, remind me. Settlement. Yeah, I mean, I do think that that's something that we would consider if Shell were open to that. We would obviously have to consult with the clients and see if it's in their best interest. Obviously, there's benefits and drawbacks to settlement. I think the benefits would be not requiring lots of people to come over to this country and make that journey and bear the, tell their stories if it could be resolved earlier than that and in a way that we think is satisfactory, and make sure that, there are steps put in place to require Shell to remediate to the standard that we expect, then we would definitely consider that. But if not, we're very happy to go all the way to trial.
Mike, Zainab, you want to add anything, or should we take another round of questions? We have 5 minutes left, so I'm turning to that side. I hope that's fine. We will bundle the two questions, please. Yes, please, with you first.
Hi. Oh, it's quite loud. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Leela. I worked with Forensic Architecture on their analysis of Israel's genocide in Gaza, and I was just wondering, in your opinions, this is, I guess, for everyone, but for these types of cases, what you think the role of new kinds of evidence, 3D modeling, simulation, timelining is, and relatedly, whether you think it's all a bit too modern for the courts and it's better to just stick with more traditional types of evidence.
We can take the last one, please.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Stephanie Bergen. I'm a legal intern with the International Bar Association. I was wondering if you believe that, as we have seen local community engagement and prior consultations rights rising up, do you believe that this would have helped prevent or could help alleviate some of the damages that have been done?
So last hand, very briefly, if you can keep it.
I am Oluwabusai Oburola from Anglia Ruskin University. I just wanted to ask about whether or not the grant of the rights of nature could help protect these the riverine areas in in Nigeria, and if that's been considered at all or is yet to be considered. And the question to Okpabi, do you think that the Nigerian government would support rights like this? For example, in New Zealand, we have the rights of rivers, the Wanganui River, for example, and the river is seen as a person. And with these grants of rights, the river can actually stand in court, true representatives by itself. So do you think this can be an approach or a strategy to help protect Ogale or...
Thank you so much. Maybe we start with either of you now, perhaps on the question of evidence and new types of forms of evidence and how they can be used.
I'll touch on it because we've been following forensic architecture's work, and that style of mapping is really excellent. We definitely look up to, at RAID, we look up to that style of mapping. I know as the lawyers mentioned as well, in terms of having to prove which spill came from where, that was kind of appealed as part of the Shell case, but it's also something we're looking at in Congo where, Glencore will say, oh, well, that's not our spill, that comes from the other mining company. And I think those kind of tools would be really excellent in this particular context where you're trying to kind of establish where the wastewater is coming from, which rivers flow where, and kind of the various kind of ways and mechanisms that companies are dealing with their own waste. And it turns into quite tall, with mining waste, especially gold mining, it's, you have massive kind of mountains of waste that just end up just sitting there. So yeah, I can see that becoming more of a tool in future, but I don't know what others think.
Mark, you have been working perhaps with more traditional forms of evidence with the reporting and the...
Yeah, but we've also,
sense?
Amnesty's also worked with forensic architecture, and we were also trying to be innovative in the ways that we research. But I think in addition to how you could use 3D modeling, for example, as evidence in a trial, I think as campaigners, I think it's also an extremely engaging, can be an extremely engaging and captivating way of presenting information to the public. And I think, look, there are plenty of human rights lawyers at Amnesty. I'm not. I'm a former journalist. And the fact is, to hold a company like Shell to account and to bring justice for King Okpabi and the people of Ogale, we need people with all kinds of skills. And we need the campaigners, outside the court the other day, just as much as we need the lawyers, I think. And forensic architecture and the work they do is amazing, and can help that movement building, really, and help that communication work.
Thank you. King Okpabi, would you like to take the question on rights of nature, perhaps?
Yeah. Well, Nigeria, because of the makeup of Nigeria, and the Nigerian government does not manufacture anything. All the money they have is coming from the natural resources and the right of, and these things are domiciled in the regions and in people's villages. So Nigeria will not support any law that we give, for instance, now, every mineral in Nigeria belongs to the Nigerian government. And even the oil at the sea, all the water areas that belong to the geographical area of Nigeria belongs to the government. So anything that will give such right to locals will not be accepted by the government. But if those rights, if it is something that you say, okay, every country can, maybe they can support it. That's my view. I don't think that at this moment, Nigeria will want to support any such rights now.
Okay. You'll have the last...
I'm happy to leave it at that, but yeah, I think that was a good answer. Thank you.
Okay, well then join me in thanking our panel.